What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're into the fight talk. So this is it. One of the most significant trilogies in MMA history will hopefully come to some resolution on Saturday. Stipe Miocic is defending the heavyweight title against Daniel Cormier in what DC has declared will likely be his final fight. They split the first two. DC won the first via shocking knockout and Stipe won the second with the late TKO. Now heading into that first fight versus DC, Stipe had been establishing his claim as the greatest UFC heavyweight ever, having defended his title successfully 3 times, something that no UFC heavyweight had ever done. I still think the last emperor, Fedor Emelianenko, is the greatest MMA heavyweight of all time, but Stipe, he's right there. And although Cormier spent most of his MMA career at light heavyweight 205, in the heavyweight fights he did have before and after his run at 205, where he earned a title in John Jones' absence, DC had also established himself as one of the greatest heavyweights, becoming champ versus Stipe and winning all but one fight there, with that one loss also coming versus Stipe. Very different career paths for both fighters, and it's just an added bonus that their roads happen to lead to this excellent competitive rivalry. Not a rivalry built on some personal grudge or some bad blood between one another. This rivalry is pure competition, pure skills, pure performance. Now, Stipe is known for his boxing, although he's a former NCAA Division I wrestler and used much of that in his title defense versus Francis Ngannou, one of the most devastating punchers the sport has ever seen. Stipe wins most of his fights with his skilled boxing, pressure, movement, solid combinations, and most of these wins come via TKO, KO. He gets them out of there. Now, Daniel Cormier, in MMA at least, has been a pressure boxer / wrestler who pushes the pace and exhibits some extraordinary physical strength. And as I said, Stipe was an NCAA Division I wrestler. Daniel Cormier was an elite wrestler, Division I silver medalist, several-time world competition medalist, and as he said after his win versus Volkan Oezdemir to capture the light heavyweight title, there's levels to this. Here's the problem. DC is 41 years old. He can probably hang with Stipe in the first couple of rounds, striking pretty evenly, and as we saw in their first fight, has the power to knock Stipe clean out. The problem would come from the third round on, and I don't know if this is recency bias in having just seen him wilt in the 4th round after taking some perfectly placed and timed body shots from Stipe, which led to the TKO, but I expect DC's motor and performance over a long period of time to be compromised by DC's age. Not to mention also being the shorter fighter and weighing between 235 and 245. Stipe came into the rematch weighing 230, the lowest he'd weighed for any fight in his UFC career. The X factor in this fight might be the smaller cage size in the Apex arena. While Stipe should still have room to circle and box, making DC have to spend energy trying to close the distance and collapse the pocket, this will make it a little easier for DC to get close to Stipe, to stick his hand out there. He likes to kind of paw and then turn that hand out there into a jab. He keeps it out there, touch hands, and then drives it down, right down the middle. It's going to make it a little easier for him to get into that type of closer boxing range, as opposed to having to track Stipe down as Stipe circles. It's going to make it a little easier to do some of that hand control and hand trapping and turning those into potentially fight-altering power punches like he did in the first fight. It's going to make it easier for DC to threaten takedowns, to secure takedowns. I truly believe that the cage size favors DC here. Not to mention the motivation DC is bringing into this one, having been stopped in their last fight. And he's got to be especially cognizant of his reaction to those body shots. But there's also no shortage of motivation on Stipe's side. The outcome of this fight will tell a big part of the story of that decorated champ's legacy. Check it. If Evander Holyfield beats Riddick Bowe 2 out of 3 times instead of losing 2 out of 3 times, his career is viewed in a much different esteem, especially after having beaten a slightly diminished Mike Tyson twice in the mid-90s. Stipe losing twice to a 40-year-old who'd spent most of his career in another division wouldn't be the best look for Stipe and would crush any conversation that puts him at the top of the heavyweight food chain. Whether these conversations matter is anyone's opinion. I believe they do. If I had to handicap this fight, I'm giving Stipe a slight edge. I think that DC really needs to put it on him in the first couple of rounds, either winning those first 2 rounds convincingly so that he'd only have to win 1 of the final 3 rounds, or he needs to do enough to really hurt him in those first couple rounds and then finish him either within that frame or in the third. If those first 2 rounds are really close and significant damage hasn't been done to Stipe, then I could really picture DC breathing out of his mouth by the 3rd round. I can see flashes of DC versus Alexander Gustafsson, where DC did come through in a big way to convincingly win a very competitive fight, but he was visibly tired in some portions and was being outboxed in others. Now granted, Gus had the ability, especially then, to hang with even a Jon Jones, but DC was also 5 years younger when he beat Gus. And if you look at DC's most recent wins outside of knocking Stipe out, they were against Rumble Johnson, who gets overwhelmed and kind of quits versus DC if he can't get him out of there early, or against Derek Lewis, who was pretty easily outclassed, even though Lewis looked great last weekend. And DC also beat Volkan Oezdemir, a really good fighter, but not elite. Stipe is none of those guys. Yes, Rumble hits harder than perhaps anyone outside of Ngannou, but I don't see the same heart and grit out of him that I do from Stipe. And if DC doesn't have Stipe in trouble going into that 3rd round, then I think it begins to favor Stipe, who, to be fair, is no spring chicken himself. He's 37 and doesn't seem to plan on fighting much longer either. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this is Stipe's final fight with a win. I don't think that he runs it back with Ngannou, who he's out-wrestled and beaten via decision. I do see him entertaining a fight versus Jon Jones if Jon Jones decides to move to heavyweight. So I've got Stipe Miocic beating Daniel Cormier in the rubber match. And I'm kind of tempted to say that this one will be very unlike the first 2 and will actually go to the scorecards, although only one of Stipe's last 8 fights have done so. And 25 minutes is a long time for a 37 and 41-year-old to be going at it. The result in this one is actually anyone's guess, but I'm going with Stipe because 1, he's a little younger, 2, he really seemed to figure something out late in that second fight when he started landing those game-changing body shots. And 3, because he and his legacy stand to lose a lot more with the loss here than DC does. Cormier's greatness, I believe, is a little more cemented, and simply capturing the heavyweight title, becoming a 2-division champ was just the icing on the cake. Sure, if he beats Stipe 2 out of 3, then goes off into the sunset, that'd be a near perfect ending to an already great career. The perfect ending, of course, would come with a win over Jon Jones, but I don't think that's going to happen. But Stipe, on the other hand, can't lose this one and retain the same esteem that he held when he became the first UFC heavyweight champ to successfully defend the strap 3 times. Some of that glow would be lost with the loss here in the rubber match versus DC. So I'm slightly favoring Stipe here, but I'm really just excited to see how this critical and pivotal rubber match plays out. But let me know your thoughts on the fight. Who are you picking and why? Also, how does a win or loss impact either fighter's career? And finally, wouldn't a draw or some DQ really suck here? I just hope that we have some resolution after a 3rd fight. Please, again, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.